I cannot imagine for the life of me that Netflix will simply say, let us make our organization a successful company without defining that, and simply say, go and define it in your own terms. You are now empowered to go and do what you do like. This is a complete disaster. Let's suppose a guy out there in marketing says, I'm going to spend 600 million ringgit on marketing and sales, and the sales that they're going to get is only 5 million per year. Of course, you have to shoot the guy in the head. He must be totally mad to do that.
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father-son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, as well as faith. We've been on an 8-part series looking at your 8 steps of transformation. First episode, we talked about setting the strategic direction.
Yeah.
After you've set the strategic direction with your leadership, we then go into running labs to determine what are the action plans, granular action plans that will help to bring us towards that true north. From the labs, we then talked about the importance of running open days where we invite the public or other key stakeholders, external stakeholders to come in and give feedback. And then in last week's episode, we talked about how do we then become very, very pregnant, as you say, with those goals by publishing a roadmap. So letting people know exactly how you are going to arrive at that true north so that you are held accountable for it. From there, once we are very pregnant with our goal, the next thing is for us to deliver.
Absolutely.
And one way that we ensure delivery is through setting very, very stringent key performance indicators or KPIs, which is what we're going to talk about in today's episode, KPI setting and why it's important. In fact, there's a big debate about whether or not KPIs are even healthy for companies. We can explore that a little bit later.
Okay.
But Dad, maybe explain to us what is the thinking with having KPI setting as one of the instituted steps within the methodology.
Yes, Leon. The first thing I would like to mention is that if you implement KPI on a standalone basis, you're bound to fail. You will have a lot of criticism on the use of KPI if it's done on a standalone basis. That's why you and I at pains trying to explain that KPI is one of the 8-step process. It's not the number 1 process, it's number 5. It cannot come by itself as a standalone thing. And so you will hear in the debate later why that is very, very important. And so in my mind, that is key for us to do. When you understand the KPIs flows from the previous process steps, then you realize the logic behind it. It's not just by itself at number 5. KPI is part of number 6, part of number 7, and part of number 8. That's why if you see it's an integrated process, then you'll see why we are so convinced that KPI is a very useful tool to achieve the true north.
Talk me through how PEMANDU Associates goes about setting KPIs and how do you then manage this with your clients, whether it's governments or whether it's businesses as well.
So the KPI must come directly from the roadmap. Don't come with any more new thing, the no more KPI that is beyond what is written in the roadmap, because you're already pregnant. So from that, you realize that what is in the KPI was originally from the labs. And you realize that what it came from the lab was the input from the cross-section of people in the organization, not just the senior managers. Where did the KPIs, individual KPIs, originally derive themselves from? From the true north. The big true north target that was put out there right up front by top management. So you will see, as you move through it, there is the true north, then you have the labs, then you have the KPIs that are from the people. That thread called the golden thread that links all the 8 steps is what makes it very, very powerful. So to begin with, the KPI must come from the roadmap. The second thing that you need to do is this. You need to communicate and cascade this throughout the organization, because to the point that you mentioned before, if the top management are completely committed and they are pregnant, they have to make other people within the organization pregnant too. So that's why you must run workshops. You don't get into KPI implementation until you have run KPI workshops. You run various KPI workshops within various ministries or within a company divisions, departments, and the staff that are involved in the implementation. Everybody who is going to be involved in the implementation, they need to come into the KPI workshops. So we run this in PEMANDU. We used to run them over a 2-week period just to go through this. Every question that people pose around the KPI subjects is dealt with during those 2 weeks workshop because we run them throughout the organization. Then people are all on the same page why you're doing it.
Yeah, it's worth noting that one of the key arguments against a culture of KPI setting is the fact that KPIs stifle creativity or KPIs stifle innovation. Which is true if KPIs are purely, derived, standalone or purely derived from one individual or maybe just 2 or 3 individuals in management or in leadership, creating those things without actual input from others.
Absolutely.
I think the key thing to note here, because I can just imagine people are going to say, yeah, but how are people going to be bought in if you say that leadership is important, but if leadership is dictating what the KPIs are, is that not going to create a very rigid structure or rigid environment? And the point here is we have to remember that the KPI setting only comes in at step 5.
Correct.
Because before that, you have your strategic workshop meeting, which still arguably at this stage is very much conversation held within management, within leadership. But then as you mentioned, in step 2, we then go into labs. And this is where you start to bring in your operational teams to not only discuss how we're going to arrive at that true north, but to also provide their inputs on what they think can be better. So the idea is by the time you actually get to the agreed KPIs...
by the way, the step 3 is the open day.
Exactly. So there is not just alignment with operational teams within your organization, but there's also now alignment as well as awareness from external stakeholders. So if you're a business, then it's your customers.
Correct.
If you are a government, then it is your public.
Citizens,
It's your rakyat who are now aware of what you want to do, how you're going to do it, and are going to hold you accountable to it. So actually, when you see KPI setting in this framework or in this frame, then it's actually no longer something that contributes to a rigid culture. But actually it goes back to innovation, because the whole process of arriving at the KPIs to begin with was through a very facilitative, was all done through, in an environment of innovation and testing and debating of ideas.
You describe it very well, Leon. I mean, that's precisely the point. So in fact, KPI does not stifle creativity and innovation if it's done that way. But if it's done with the top guy in the organization waking up one morning, say, this is the KPI for the whole organization, this is how it's done with Department 1 and Department 2, that will stifle creativity and innovation. But you should not do it that way.
Some people might also argue that whether or not the KPIs, let's assume that the organization, and its working teams are aligned on the KPIs. They also agree that these are worthy or worthwhile KPIs to be held to. There's also an argument that says even if you assume those things, that measuring too much can sometimes lead to teams that feel burnt out, or just create maybe sometimes an overly competitive environment. I think in one of our very, very early episodes, we talked about finding that balance between collaboration and competition. There's merit in both, but sometimes when we go too far down, maybe the competitive side, we see some ugliness in there. Similarly, if we then go too far down the collaborative side, then sometimes what that leads to is, an inability to push forward and to really play the game of the impossible. So finding that balance. So, based on that, some of the arguments out there are that too much KPI setting, even if they are the right KPIs, can lead to burnout, can lead to over competitiveness within an organization, which can become toxic. How do we balance that? What's your view?
I totally agree. As I said before, you should begin with true north first. If you don't agree the true north, then you run into the problem of having a myriad of KPI throughout the organization. So if you're clear about true north, the true north measure normally comes with 1 or 2 or 3. Best true north measures normally 1 or 2 or 3. If you get into even 16 True North measures, you are already running into trouble of, use the word, lack of balance. So you must be very clear about it, what it is. For example, the economic transformation program. The True North is very simple. There are 3 measures. Number 1, True North, we must increase the gross national income per capita for Malaysia. And we had a number that is set out by the year 2020. The second thing, the number of jobs to be created. We want to create jobs. The third one was the number of investments, the amount of investment that the private sector is going to put into the economy. Because without investment, you can't create projects, and therefore no projects mean there are no jobs that you then create. And without the investment, there's no growth in the gross national income. Those are the 3 measures. When we agreed with the 3 measures, then we had 12 different sectors that were doing agriculture, oil and gas, electrical, electronics, and etc. Each of them their own KPIs that relates to those three measures. And so if there are, then we have activities in the oil palm, and the activity in the oil palm was to plant X number, millions of trees, and that is needed, oil palm trees, because the analysis that we showed that if we don't do that, in 10 years' time, more than a third of the trees have already well beyond their productive period when they can have fresh fruit bunch. And therefore, you need to start replanting. That's an example. And even we also mentioned, apart from replanting from the existing one, new areas, opening new oil palm areas for them to do that. Those are very specific things. So if you start at the very big idea, it is basically 3 measures of True North, and you really focus on it. So if you come with an investment, you say the private sector, I want to propose to the government, I want to invest 6 million ringgit on a project, but I actually creating 3 jobs, and the help from the government is 4 million, I can assure you we will reject that. Because you're now asking the government to put money instead of the private sector. So we had a general rule of thumb, more than 90% of the investment should come from the private sector, only 10% is from the government. Because investment predominantly must come from the private sector. That's the way in which the government grow the economy without going into so much debt. So I know I'm going to a lot of detail here, but to get the balance, you really must agree the True North. But once you agree the True North, it's the job of the labs to come with the measures specific to the activities that will contribute towards the True North. That's why each of the divisions or departments or ministries will have their own adaptations to it. But it comes from there. If it comes from a void, you're going to have a chaos because it's not tied through what's called the golden thread. The golden thread must stem right from the True North measures.
Yeah, I guess the clue is also in the name itself. They're called key performance indicators, keyword being key, not all performance indicators. Because I think I agree with that argument too. If you are overly obsessed with measuring every single thing, then you are naturally going to create, not only you're not only going to lead people towards a path of burnout, but then actually as an organization, you're probably not going to be very effective because, as you said, when you are not clear on what your True North is and you want to measure everything, then you're probably not going to get anywhere. You'll probably end up just being a jack of all trades. You'd be somewhat good, in certain things, but if you want to really play the game of the impossible, then it's deciding based on your True North, then what are the key things? There's this thing called the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. So for those who are unaware, the basic premise of it is that 80% of outcomes are caused by 20% of causes. So as an organization, if we're doing KPI setting, then our focus should be what is that 20% that we can focus on that will lead to that 80%.
Building from that, that's why when I said we are clear about the True North, when we run the labs, we have 12 labs, that means 12 economic sectors. We basically ask each of them, for example, oil and gas, agriculture, oil palm, electrical, electronics, what are the activities and projects that will contribute towards gross national income per capita, leads to more job creation, 3, leads to investment mainly from private sector. That's what it is. There are only 3.
Yeah.
So what you do within the sectors are different, but it's all linking to the same thing. Then you realize the activities you're going to focus on are the ones that will deal with that Pareto principle. You realize only 20% of the activities are going to give you the biggest impact on GNI, the biggest impact on job, the biggest impact on investment. So the rest are not important. So when the rest are not giving you that in the output, then you say, these are low on my priority list. We're not going to focus on that. So then you realize you become quite ruthless in determining what are your key priorities, to the word key performance indicator. Spot on, Leon.
What do you think is the space for self-led goal setting? And the reason why I ask this is a lot of disruptive organizations, Netflix being an example, they don't really emphasize KPI, or at least centralized KPI setting. I think their culture is very much, you decide what your own KPIs are. And I suppose the argument to that is that might create a better environment for innovation, because you are giving the power, you're truly empowering your staff, your teams to develop their own goals. What are your thoughts on that, and where do we exercise some of that as well in PEMANDU Associates? Because just to be clear, even though we are very much advocating KPIs and very much advocating the fact that leadership need to be very heavily involved, or at least very heavily aligned on what these KPIs are in order to drive them. That doesn't mean that we are running some sort of dictatorship. I think there has to be a room for self-led development.
I would say this. Any company worth their salt that will say this, that say, we want the organization, our company, to be very successful, without defining what is the measure of success in a true north fashion. Don't even define it. Vague notion of successful company. I want you all in the whole organization go forth and do whatever you think is right to make us a successful company. That is a panacea for disaster. Without me studying what exactly Netflix is doing, I'm convinced they're not doing it like that. I'm very convinced Netflix has an idea right from the top. They may not use the word true north, or they may not use the word vision. They have an idea of what they need to do. I'm pretty sure even if they didn't run the labs, I'm pretty sure there is a cascade process that link them to that true north idea. And I'm pretty sure when they say, I want you guys to be self-led, you know what we want. You are creative guys. You come and tell us how to go and do it to achieve that. I can see that can work too. And I'm not completely shutting out the idea, but the idea, I cannot imagine for the life of me that Netflix will simply say, let us make our organization a successful company without defining that, and simply say, go and define it in your own terms. You are now empowered to go and do what you do like. This is a complete disaster. Let's suppose a guy out there in marketing says, I'm going to spend 600 million ringgit on marketing and sales, and the sales that they're going to get is only 5 million per year. Of course, you have to shoot the guy in the head. He must be totally mad to do that. There's no such thing, in my view, that a CEO wake up in one day and said, go and do whatever you please, and that is completely chaos. I don't believe that Netflix is done it like that.
Yeah. Even biblically, we are afforded grace.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are also some very clear, if you like, key value systems.
Yeah.
And those form the parameters with which we have freedom to exercise free will, and to, we don't wake up every morning hearing sort of like daily instructions from God on what to do. But I think we generally know what we are supposed to orient ourselves towards in being more like Him. And then within that, we have freedom to do what we think, set goals, whether it's decide what your to-do list is going to be for the day. I don't think we can look at the Bible and see, and expect the Bible to tell us, John chapter 4 tells me that today I need to brush my teeth. It tells me I need to do 20 push-ups. Sure. We look to those things to give us a general framework as to what it means to be more like Jesus. But actually the how, that is where there is space for self-led development, self-led goal setting, if you like. I'm curious, what was your first, I suppose, encounter with having a actually that's a good one. We can go to that later, but just having a sense of KPI for yourself personally.
Well, the first one was in school. Obviously, any one of us who, the earliest time you remember the KPI was in school. It's called grades. And every subject is got the grade. And so therefore you already, right from the time you go to school, you understand KPI. And they will tell you at the end of the year, you sit for public exams, and then you have a grade. And you know where you stand relative to everybody else. And of course, a lot of people complain that the grading may not be subjective and etc. But all said and done, that's my first exposure to KPI. Is the grades in school, subject by subject, and also position in class.
Yeah. And what was it that then informed how you implement KPI setting today?
That basically, what it does is that because we were very clear about the true north measure. The true north measure in this case is position in class. Are you number one, number two, number three? Underneath the true north measures are the various subjects that you take. So the score for each subject relative to your other students in the class will put your position in class. And so you know already the linkage between true north. My first impression of true north is the position in class is true north. Then the subsequent is the grades per subject are the KPIs that leads towards that position in class. And that's not done in isolation, by the way, Leon. Huh? This is done relative to the competition. But so you cannot say you are doing very well to yourself. You improve compared to last year. But if others run faster than you, then you find that you're actually not doing so well because it's relative to the others in class. It just reminds me, many years ago, John Salinger wrote a book called My Name is Aram. In this very, very nice book, short story, this little boy was running a race. And he was running this race. He closed his eyes. And he was swearing to himself where he closed. They were running this 100 yards in the book. He was convinced that every sinew in his body, his muscle, he was running the best he could. He was convinced that if he opens his eyes, he'll be first. When they reached the finishing line, he opened his eyes, he was last. Because the moral of the story in John Salinger's book, My Name is Aram, that he forgot to look at the competition. So when you realize that, early on, I realized that it was very important to think where you're going relative to the competition. This is why when I mentioned the word kiasu and I mentioned earlier on the word katui, because your grandpa, and he told me a lot about this idea of looking at your competition. And however good you think you are, you must always respect the competition. Never think only at yourself relative to what you're doing. You can make improvements, but then you realize you look at others and move far better and faster than you do. My Name is Aram. That's the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in that there's also, and we did talk about this in last week's episode as well, the importance of doing everything in the context of a wider community. Who are the people you're competing with? Who are the people that are holding you accountable? Or even who are the people that are going to encourage you in the journey? But besides that, I think also what KPIs do is that they help to steer you towards action. To your point also, and the story that you mentioned earlier, it was because he spent so much time only dreaming, imagining, and not actually doing it.
He's doing it, but he's doing it, looking.
Correct. He's doing it, but he's not looking, and therefore his mind is still not focused on actually scoring the goal. His mind is focused on just imagining scoring the goal. So when we set very stringent KPIs, and when you've got a good way of monitoring that, that helps to ensure that people are more likely to actually do it.
When I went to Royal Albert Hall, one of the speakers, he said this: reality is the wall that you hit when you have been chasing an illusion. So in this particular story about,
that's a good one,
about this, My Name is Aram. And this guy is chasing an illusion because he was dreaming about it. He was not looking at the competition. That he has assumed that whatever he was doing, he was best in class, best in position. But he wasn't. He was just chasing an illusion in his mind.
Maybe tell us a bit about your Royal Albert Hall What were you doing there?
Well, it was a very big Alpha Leadership Conference. They've done it for a few years now. They've done it, all the series they had it at the Royal Albert Hall. It's really one of the iconic, one of the best hall in London. So I was invited to speak there. It was a Christian conference.
Yes.
But a lot of non-Christians are there.
Yeah, just to give you all an idea, if this is your first time hearing about the leadership conference, to give you an idea of the sort of caliber of speakers that we've had in the past, we've had the likes of Simon Sinek speak at the conference, and he's not even a Christian, but this is a conference as much as it is for Christian leaders. We also acknowledge that. I think Nicky Gumbel once said that we as Christians don't hold a monopoly on the truth. I know, and so I'm just recognizing that there is wisdom to be drawn from all sources. This is really a fantastic.
It was really incredible. There was 5,300 people. At that conference. It was electric.
What did you speak about?
I spoke about leadership and I spoke about transformation, and that was good. There was also a pre-recorded 17 minutes video that Abel and also they are both pastors at your church, and Jacinta, the two of them were interviewing me, and we showed that there to 5,300 people. And then I also ran a seminar in a panel discussion. It was really, really very good. It was absolute. There were people that came out touched by it immediately. And since that conference, I've had a few phone calls and Zoom calls. In fact, 3 days ago, I had some guy from America. I had a very, very good call with him. His name is Joe Mans. He ran an enterprise in the US. And he wanted to connect because he thinks a lot of the things I said resonated with him. There were folks that sent me emails, etc., to follow up on some of the things that we talked about. And I told them, come and watch this video podcast.
And they have, because I have seen, it's been, I think, 2 weeks now since you've returned from the UK. And since then, we've had a couple of new subscribers who have commented and said that they were directed here because they listened to you speak at the Royal Albert Hall at the Leadership Conference. So to all of our new subscribers who are at the Leadership Conference, hello and thank you for subscribing.
The interesting thing was 2 days ago through LinkedIn, because we are, for the first time, I'm on LinkedIn. I've never... Finally, Leon, you persuaded me to do it because of the podcast.
Next thing we should get you on is Instagram.
And the interesting thing is, I looked at my LinkedIn 2 days ago, then I saw a guy from Indonesia. He said they've been watching our podcast, and then he's put up a letter. This at the request of the incoming new president of Indonesia. They've invited me to go and give a 1.5 hour talk in Indonesia to the new leaders that are in his new cabinet. He will be sworn in October, but they want me to come to Jakarta and also be able to share with them insights on leadership as well as on transformation, so that they are well geared up when they are ready for the new lineup for the new cabinet in Indonesia. It's really fantastic. It will be a great opportunity. That's on the 25th of June. I will be there. And you will come along with me as well. And that will be a wonderful time to go and do there. I'm really alone the fact that these guys are really on the lookout. And the best part is that the new president, he wants to make things happen. And so he's not waiting for him to be on the job. He's preparing his team already long before he takes on the role. That's really laudable. And it's a program that I'm just one of the speakers on the program.
Yeah. On the topic of preparing your teams, as a leader, how do you manage potential resistance? You mentioned that earlier. How do you manage resistance among your teams for some of the KPIs? So I'm sure there will be resistance for certain things.
If you set KPIs on realistic KPIs, you do not have resistance. But if you start from where we began at the point of departure on the game of the impossible, that means set targets that cannot be achieved based on the current way of doing it, immediately you'll get the resistance. It's almost immediate. How did it feel? There was one guy that told me, if you start that conversation, Idris, you will have brick thrown into your face. That's what he is, an American, so he dared to put that kind of robust kind of statement. But resistance is real. So in Malaysia Airlines, when I said this is the the impossible target, of course I had a resistance, all in sundry. So the solution was very simple. We have 4 levels of performance against the KPI. This is how we manage resistance. 4 levels. Level 1 is the lowest level of performance against the set KPI. It's called below target. Okay. Number 2 is on target, which is on realistic target. That means these are targets that can be achieved based on the current way of doing it. But you're telling them you're not going to settle for that. Then you have the 3rd level is above target or exceeding target. That is 3rd level. The 4th one is outstanding performance relative to the Olympics or impossible target. And then you tell them the reward system is geared accordingly. If you come out with only one target, which is the impossible target, you will have tremendous resistance. I realized when we created the 4-tiered performance level against the target, then you had willing buyers and willing sellers. Everybody was prepared to do it. Then you conquer the fear of failure. And that's how I deal with resistance.
What's the next topic? What's our next step in the journey of transformation?
The next step that we're going to do is about implementation. This is the most important part of all the 8 steps. I would say at the centerpiece of it all is implementation. Whatever you do on step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, if you don't succeed in step 6, which is implementation, it's all dead. It's of no use. So the next podcast is the podcast that everybody must tune in and listen to because that's the centerpiece. Yeah. And then after that is step 7 and 8, which is about validation and appraisal and performance towards the letup and report out. But the 6th step is the critical step. I'm reminded by a comment by Sir Michael Barber. Michael Barber used to do the work that I did for the government of Malaysia, and he was doing it for Tony Blair's administration. He was doing exactly that. He said this: if you spend 90% of your time on planning and 10% on implementation, that's a guaranteed panacea for failure. But you should reverse that so that the planning is only 10%. 90% of the effort is on implementation. And that is why what Michael Barber and the team have done in the UK is very similar to the thing we do. Although it's an 8-step process, I can tell you that's why we say planning only is done only in a matter of 6 weeks lab. And the workshop with leadership is 1 day. And the open day is only 1 day. Writing the draft document, the roadmap, is not something that you ask somebody to write. It's the lab people that write the chapters for that book. That's why we only take no more than a month to finish the document. And so you can imagine when we started in 2009, within the first 4 months, we are ready with the planning. And then from then on, for the next 10 years, is implementation, day in and day out. And this is important. So the next one is the most important one. I would say anybody that want to follow our podcast, begin with step 1. If you don't want to listen to the rest, jump straight into step 6, because that's the biggest part of it all. But I would say today, if you want to just only look at implementation by itself, that's also bad. It will not succeed. It must come together with the integral 8-step process, because everything that Leon and I talked about is only talking about the whole architecture of transformation. And you cannot cherry pick. You can't say, I'm interested in episode 2, I'm not interested in episode 1, I only pick up KPIs, and I only want to do implementation. And then I think it's a disaster to do it like that.
Well, I'm looking forward to unpacking that with you and for all of you watching or listening as well. Thank you all for joining us on another episode of The Game of Impossible. We just want to say thank you so much for continuing to follow us on this journey. You know, it is your support that has helped this channel to grow, that has helped to widen our reach as well, leading to opportunities like, you know, speaking in Jakarta that will be coming up soon. We have a few other sort of speaking engagements as well, where we'll be doing, some of them where we'll be doing a live format of this podcast setting, but with a live audience. So it is actually thanks to all of you for commenting, for subscribing. It really helps us boost us up the algorithm. So we just want to thank you, and we want to encourage, if you are not yet subscribed, please do subscribe. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Spotify, where we have all of these episodes up on audio format as well, if you prefer to consume content that way. For those of you who maybe, to your point on cherry picking, maybe you want to cherry pick a little bit to get an idea of some of the topics that we talk about before you commit to a full episode, you can check out our Instagram. You can also check out our TikTok, where we post short form 30 seconds to 60-second bite-sized snippets of some of the key points in our podcast. So do follow us, subscribe, and we just want to say once again, thank you so much for listening.